and you will introduce our guest.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Mark Sweetingham. Mark is that unusual body. He is actually a local lad. Doing a job locally. He has lived in the area. He's admittedly moved a little farther to Essex now than he was originally. But he was local, and he went to a local school. The school was even president was there, but not necessarily at the same time, I think.
No, I wasn't there. No.
Oh, you weren't there?
I was in the borough.
Oh, you were in the borough.
We shared a headmaster.
Yes, okay, fine. You weren't there. Okay. Mark, in fact, went to the Romford Comprehensive School, which will be known to some of you then, and he was interested in writing. And in fact, he was very interested in the news. And thought that he would like to take that up as a career. And in fact, for 25 years, I think it is, he was associated with the Romford Recorder. So what we've got a local lad is editing and controlling, within his master's allowance, the local Romford Recorder, a senior paper for the area, and now he's going to talk about it and perhaps about himself too. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for that. Yes, I will talk a little bit about myself and the Romford Recorder and a few other titles that I'm involved with, and a bit about the industry, past and present, because it's changed a lot since I've been involved with it, and it's changing as we speak. So we can talk about that, and I can either take questions as I go along, as you see fit, or I'll take them at the end, whichever suits you. Basically, I was, as you've just heard, born and bred in Romford. Went to a local school. In fact, delivered the recorder when I was probably 13 years old. So I've been associated with it for a fair few years, one way or another. As you heard, I've always been a journalist. I've not done anything else in my life, although I've done quite a lot of jobs within the industry itself. And became a journalist because, yes, I enjoyed writing, and I was always interested in the news. But basically, this Romford Comprehensive boy was a bit of a duffer at most other things, so really felt that that was the only avenue open to him. So off I went. Luckily, I got a job pretty quickly, which is not something you can say these days for youngsters coming out of education. And did okay. It was all right. I enjoyed it, and it's gone on from there. So I've done various jobs in the industry, and I've worked for various newspapers, mostly local newspapers, but I have worked for national newspapers. On various occasions, I worked for the gone but not necessarily lamented News of the World, Sunday Mirror, Sun, and a few other odds and ends over the years. I think they were much better newspapers in my day than they are now, but that's another argument. So yeah, the changes I've seen have been quite dramatic in those times. Currently, as you've heard, I'm editor of the Romford Recorder and have been editor for 15, 16 years. I've been with the company longer than that, and I've done a number of jobs for the company. I've edited the Romford Recorder in my time, and I've held various other positions. I also took a slight step away from journalism at one stage, and was a general manager for one end of the organisation for about 18 months. But that was horribly boring and not really what I wanted to do. So when the opportunity came up to edit the Romford Recorder, I leapt at it and came back into journalism proper, and I've not regretted it. It's quite unusual for someone who's grown up in the area to be become editor of their local newspaper. So I'm quite proud of that fact. And really, these days, people move around all over the country, and there aren't many other people who can actually say that. Now, the Romford Recorder itself, it's obviously, I'm sure you all read it on a diligent and regular basis, every word. Tell me if I'm wrong later. But it's been there and it's been serving Romford in the first instance and latterly the borough of Havering for 108 years, which is a fair amount of time, but is not a hugely long time in terms of local newspapers. I won't swear to it, but I think probably the oldest local newspaper in the country is something over getting on 200 years at a time, maybe a bit longer. So a lot of newspapers are 100 plus. So we're in good company, but we're by no means one of the oldest. What we are also is London's biggest selling weekly newspaper, and have been for some time. Paid for newspaper, that is. And obviously there's a distinction between those you go and pay 50 pence, 70 pence for, and those that you pick up free. But we're London's biggest selling paid for, so and that, again, we're quite proud of that fact.
What is the circulation?
Circulation now is, it obviously goes up week to week, but on average 19,000. So we can reckon, yeah, it's come down, as they will have over the years. I mean, it was selling at one stage, when I first was associated with, probably 40,000, 42,000.
30 odd in my day.
30 in your day, yeah. Yeah, that's something I didn't realise until earlier today, that your esteemed treasurer was in fact a reporter on the Romford Recorder at
took an apprenticeship
at one stage, yeah. And I think I probably even read his angling column when I was a lad. So.
Still a fishy customer.
An Archant is, sorry, Romford Recorder is owned by a company named Archants, and I was telling Richard earlier, he was asking what Archant meant. Well, it doesn't mean anything basically. It was. We were bought out by a company called Eastern County Newspapers a few years ago, and because they were buying quite a lot of newspaper groups at the time, and they had newspapers from Scotland through to Devon, and they suddenly thought, well, Eastern County Newspapers doesn't really sum it up, so they employed one of these expensive consultants to come up with a new name for them, and he came up with half a dozen names that had no real meaning at all, but they quite liked the sound of Archant, so Archant we became. And it's a name as good as any, I suppose, but doesn't really explain what the company's about in my view, but there you go. But it's the biggest privately owned publisher in the country. It has around 70 weekly titles. 4 dailies in Norwich and in Suffolk, so you've got the East Anglian Daily Times, the Eastern Daily Press, the Evening News in Norwich, and the Evening Star in Ipswich, which are their mainstay titles. It's obviously a Norwich-based company, started there 170 odd years ago. Members of the Coleman Mustard family, amongst others, were the originators of that company then, as Eastern County Newspapers. In recent years, we've gone into the magazine market in quite a big way, and own now something like 80 magazines. A lot of the Life magazines, like Hertfordshire Life and Suffolk Life, and all the others up and down the country. We own most of those now, and various other magazines like Pilot magazine, What Camera, or What Digital Camera, I think it is, and lots of others. There are lots that, frankly, I don't know, but they make up quite a big part of the organisation now, and quite a profitable part of the organisation. It came about because when Eastern County Newspapers was buying up various other smaller groups around 8-9 years ago, there were lots of other smaller newspaper companies to buy, and the big companies were growing by buying up these smaller organisations. So they got to the point where there were no more smaller organisations. So companies like Archant had to think, well, where do we go from here? So they looked at magazines. There were lots of magazines that were still owned by 1 or 2 people, but profitable. And Archant went around the country buying up a good number of those. So we're now a magazine company as well as a newspaper company. Of course, we're also a web company now, as most other organisations are, and that's been one of the biggest changes in our industry in recent years, the growth of the web-based newspaper. Obviously you can't have a company these days of any description and without being on the web in some shape or form. It's it's a bit of an odd thing as far as I'm concerned, because nobody, unless you're in one of two industries currently, makes a huge amount of money out of the web, but everybody needs to be there. Gambling is one of the ones that makes a lot of money, and you can probably guess what the other one is. Neither of which I have to say Archer are involved in. So there aren't huge amounts of money being made at the moment, but you have to be there, and it's that visible presence. And I think eventually somebody will find out how you can make a lot of money on the web, and then it will take off in a big way. But the Recorder obviously is still the mainstay paper for Archer London, which is part of the organisation, and we indulged in, along with the rest of Archer newspapers, a very large makeover in recent. If you're a regular reader of the Recorder, you'll have noticed in the last year or so that it looks different to it used to. Much more modern, hopefully, much more today rather than 60s and 70s base as it used to be. And that's a result of a £4 million investment by the company in a brand new system which allows us to do the things that you see on the pages of the paper now. Very complicated, very clever. I don't understand half of it, frankly, but it means that we can actually produce papers much more efficiently and make them look much better and more relevant to today's readership. Generally speaking, people have said, yes, we like that new look. I don't know how, if you've got a view in the room, whether you like it or don't like it. I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, it's good. It's a better presentation.
Because it's not going back, so I hope you do like it. But along with that, I talked about websites. We've got the improved website as well. And now the policy is, partly due to this £4 million investment, we can now put every story that the reporters write onto the web before it goes into the newspaper. So in terms of breaking news, that means that if we had an incident this week where it'll be in tomorrow's paper, there was a stabbing in Collier Row, and we had that story. It happened early hours in the morning, and as soon as the reporters got that, it went straight onto the web while it was still being investigated. So the story was there for anyone who cared to look at it to hear about, and lots of people did. Obviously, Collier Row was buzzing with the fact that someone had been stabbed, and this man was running amok with a knife, and there was armed police all over the area, and they wanted to find out about it. So they now know they can go to the Recorder website and instantly get that information, which they do in great numbers.
Do you know how many hits you had on there?
I can't tell you offhand, no, but the information is there.
You monitor it, do you?
Sorry?
You monitor
We do, yeah.
Yeah.
I get on a daily basis a report that tells me what the top story of the day was, and what the top 10 stories of the day were, and how many hits that got. Each Archer and London papers all have that. The rest of the company has something similar, and they have a top 10 for the whole country as well, or the whole company, which covers a lot of the country. So it's a very immediate way of getting news out there, and it's a very immediate way of finding out what people are prepared to read and what they want to read. And there have been times when I've looked at the web hits and I've actually changed my mind as to what's going to be the front page story, simply because it's a story which I hadn't considered to be as good, has had more hits than the story I was going to put in the first place. So it does influence your thinking from that point of view as well. We also have in Archer London 24. I don't know if anyone's ever seen London 24, but it is, again, a relatively new website. It's an innovation as far as we're concerned. It covers the whole of London. In fact, it covers boroughs we don't have newspapers in. And so it's one way of reaching London that we can't in print. And it's taken off magnificently. It was helped hugely by the riots, because when it all kicked off with the riots, there was no other way that people were working. And they were contacting London 24. We had someone manning it literally 24/7 during those 3 or 4 days, and people were contacting London 24 saying, "I live in blah 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 blah. Is it safe for me to go home?" Or what's the transport situation like in Tottenham or wherever? And we were able to provide that information and keep up a running commentary on what was going on through London 24. And that is unique for a local newspaper organisation, and something that I don't think any of the other organisations, newspaper organisations in the South East, probably were able to do. So London 24 is really a big step forward as far as we're concerned in getting to our customers, because they're more than readers these days, they're our customers. Lots of people will go to London 24 or even their websites without actually buying the paper, so they are customers as opposed to readers. It never used to be like this. When I first started in the industry, and that was a few years ago now, it was all very much more sedate and laid back. And I'd just like to show you some examples of how it used to be. I have in my my two recorder executive briefcases here some examples. And if, oops, you wouldn't mind being my lovely assistant for 5 minutes?
It qualifies on one point.
And I'll pass these round. That gives you an idea. Those pictures there will give you an idea of what the recorder was like at the turn of the last century. And these, be careful because they are heavy. Bearing in mind everything is now done on computers at a desktop. You will see how we used to put them together. This thing here is an advert. Okay, weighs about, I don't know, 4 pounds.
Is that lead?
And it's basically lead. It's mostly.
Better hang on to it with the metal.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I'm actually going to go out from here and sell this and retire on the proceeds. But if you look at it, you'll notice that it's essentially upside down, back to front, which is obviously how it had to print in those days, because the bit of paper on there, so it has to come out the right way. Yeah. But this was produced on what was called a kishograph machine, which was basically a machine which just etched out this in some magic way and produced this from blocks of lead. Then these, along with the rest of the type, this is headline type, and I'll pass this round. Various letters, again big chunky bits of metal, were put together in a page. If you want to pass those around,
Count them when you get them back.
yeah, I'll be searching people afterwards. Yeah, so the whole thing was put together, metal type, metal adverts, metal pictures, all in a big metal frame called a chase, which was then locked together and then taken to the press, and they would just say, essentially the print and come up with that, which would be the finished page. In those days, unions held sway, print unions held sway, and they were very highly paid and very ornery, and they wouldn't take any nonsense. And there were many times when we had the press at Ilford, which is going back a few years now, they would strike and essentially hold up that edition of the newspaper until the managing director had to come down from his office and sit in the print room, negotiate with them, and eventually they would be asking for another £1 an hour, and then they negotiate and they'd come down to 80 pence an hour, and they'd say, okay, we'll take that, and then they'd put that. But that used to happen on a regular basis, and they had that power to hold the company to ransom, because they just could. That all changed with Mr. Murdoch, when he decided that he didn't want to play that game anymore, and he essentially broke the back of the unions in what was a fairly unpleasant way, but actually probably saved the industry eventually. But yes, those pictures you see, although I wasn't actually there then, when I joined, it didn't look very much different from that. It hadn't changed very much over 100 years, really.
Jim will probably remember it.
I do, exactly the same.
I saw you one of the photos.
And one of my early jobs at the recorder was what they call stone sub. Did you have a stone sub in your day?
No.
Okay. Basically, it was the Ilford plants, and I was the last editorial person to see the pages before they actually went to press.
You were at Ilford, I was at Romford. We wouldn't have had that.
Right. Okay. And okay, with the print unions, I say they were quite a stroppy lot, but you got to know them. And my job was to see all the pages off before it actually went to press. So if there's any mistakes, it was my fault. So it was being made up in this great metal frame with all these lumps of metal in it, and it was all upside down and back to front to look at. And every now and again, one of the compositors would come over and say, page 10, 4 lines over on the lead story. So I'd have to troop out there, and I'd go to page 10, which was upside down and back to front, great lump of metal, and I'd look at this and I'd say, I can't read that. And depending on which one you got, he'd say, all right, I'll read it to you. Or he'd say, well, tough, you get on with it, basically, and have to work it out. But eventually, after about a year, I could read this. I could read upside down and back to front, because it was interesting. Okay, so I could go out and I could read these things like it was myself. I couldn't touch it because you're not allowed to, but I could tell them what to say. And I felt really good. It was really great. There was really real progress. And then about a month after I congratulated myself on learning this, the company decided it was going to go over to computer settings. That was a complete waste of time. And now the only time I can use that skill is when I'm standing up in a tube train and reading somebody's newspaper who's sitting opposite me. So yeah, it's a skill nonetheless. So it's changed dramatically in my time in the industry. It's changed far more than it did in the 100 years before I began. And for the better. I think Murdoch essentially was the catalyst for that, and he's made a huge amount of money since then on the back of that. But it was an unpleasant situation. I told you I worked for News of the World on stage, and I can remember being in the News of the World newsroom at one point where the print unions were having a demonstration outside, and it was, I mean, whopping. You know, the News of the World building was a long way from the road, yet you could hear the noise evidence. It was very, very busy, and there were police and there were the pickets, and it was a complete nightmare. Couldn't get me around, basically. And a lot of people, because Murdoch won, a lot of good people actually who'd done long apprenticeships and worked very hard lost their jobs, and a lot of them obviously never worked in the industry again. Some did. You know, we have there's one editor of one of the Berkshire's local newspapers in Suffolk who was a compositor, and he changed trade and relearnt and became an editor. So it could have been done, but a great many did, and it was a sad time for them. Although essentially their unions had caused it. So now, as I say, we're computer set. It's much more fluid. It's much easier to produce a newspaper, and there are lots of newspapers up and down the country who probably exist now who wouldn't have existed in the old way, simply because it was more profitable to do it this way rather than the old union-based way. But we do have lots of competitors in the newspaper industry. We talked about websites, and there are lots of websites that are not necessarily newspaper-based, but still take readers and take advertising. Free newspapers were the big thing, going back about 15, 18 years. They were superseded by various other big free sheets, generally free magazines, I say internet advertising, all sorts of television, even radio, even though radio's taken a bit of a knock recently. They still take advertising away from what was newspapers preserve at one stage. Really, there was, when I first started, there were very few other places you could go to. So people have stopped buying newspapers in the numbers that they used to. When I was growing up in Romford, we'd have 2 daily newspapers, 2 evening newspapers, the Romford Recorder, and a Sunday newspaper on a regular basis. We'd have a daily newspaper delivered. Dad would buy one on the way to work and bring it home. We'd have an evening newspaper delivered, and Dad would buy the other evening on the way home. So that's 4 in the house one day. There aren't many households in the country who have 4 days, even 1 daily newspaper delivered to their house at the moment. And that's just an indication of A, how much more there is out there to do, and to get the news sort of and people's time. People have to have time to do that anymore. We can't, no one can sit down and read 4 daily newspapers, probably not even 1 daily newspaper. And that goes obviously for local newspapers as well. They've suffered in as much as people have more to do with their time, and their time is more precious. So they're not spending that amount of time reading as they used to. So we have to make up for that in some shape or form, and we try to. So we've gone into magazines because we've seen that's a bit of a niche market. People still read magazines. We've gone onto the web because that's where a lot of people get their news from now. We don't charge for our web newspapers. We may in the future, but currently we don't, because we want to get readership. We want people to get engaged with us. And most of those who have a paywall find that their readership, their customers, drop off dramatically, even though they may be making some money from it. But our main thing is to get the audience involved, and we have to be free to do that. So there's a huge amount going on in the industry that never went on before, and I'll talk a bit about the future later on, and where I think we're going, but it is changing in quite a dramatic way. The role of a local newspaper, and certainly the role of the Romford Recorder, hasn't really changed. That's always been the same pretty much. It's a business, so it's there to make money, obviously, but it's there to make money with the community as opposed to at the expense of the community. And I think it's really only local newspapers and possibly magazines who can say that. You can't really say that for national newspapers, and I'll talk a bit about that later. So it's community involvement as far as local newspaper goes, as far as the Romford Recorder is concerned. Fighting for its readers, campaigning for its readers, holding authority to account where necessary, basically to inform, instruct and involve. That's what we do on a regular basis, and that's what I think we've always done and what we will hopefully continue to do. There are various instances. I'll give you one in terms of fighting for its readers and fighting for the community. The issue with the local hospital trust and Queen's Hospital in particular, and the maternity section at Queen's, which has been hugely problematic, and it is not just the Romford Recorder, the Ilford Recorder has been involved in that as well, as one of our other newspapers, the Dagenham Post, has, in fighting to get that situation improved. And because obviously we're so much involved with it, a great many politicians have got involved. It's become an issue nationally, and I think if it changes, if the situation changes, which frankly doesn't show a great deal of sign of at the moment, because there's another horrendous story coming out of Queen's this week. If it does change, I think it will be our involvement, which has, without being too modest, will probably have helped that situation improve, simply because it's a huge importance of local people. And the only way that they can get their voice heard and get their frustration aired is through us, and that's what we try to do with this and what we try and do with other major issues. There have been others in the past, which I won't bore you with, but I'll tell you one instance which not only involved local people, but also involved freedom of the press, which I think would have gone unsung if it hadn't been for us. A few years ago there was a murder case in Havering. Husband killed his wife, his estranged wife, and left her hanging in their house for their children to wake up and find the next morning. We had to fight to get a lot of that information out for reasons I won't go into, but eventually the story was out, and guy's now in prison, serving a life sentence, and the story is pretty well known generally. There's another one, a mother who poisoned her own son with salt, and again her legal team stood up in the Old Bailey and asked the judge to make an order not to name her because she had a younger son who was still living, and their reasoning was that he would be traumatised by having his mother's name linked to the murder of his brother, which you can't deny would be the case. But the fact is that if they'd have had their way, you would have had a murderess who had appeared at the Old Bailey who nobody could name, which in terms of justice and freedom of the press was a ludicrous situation as far as we're concerned. So we objected to it, and it involved yours truly going to the Old Bailey and standing in front of a judge and addressing his lordship on the basis of freedom of the press. And after a bit of argument, he came down on our side, and the order was rescinded and she was named, and the story was carried as you would carry any other court story. And obviously she ended up in prison as well. So it's things like that which a national newspaper probably wouldn't have bothered doing. They would do it in really big cases, but at a local level they wouldn't get involved. So unless we're doing it, it doesn't happen. So those cases wouldn't have been heard, and the woman wouldn't have been known about, and freedom of the press would have been severely restricted. The same goes for just court cases generally. Part of the punishment for someone in court is to have their crime known about, and unless it appears in a local newspaper, it doesn't get publicised. So only half the punishment is there as far as the law is concerned. So we carry regular court stories from the local courts, even though Havering Court is no longer what it used to be, nor goes to Redbridge, but we still carry those cases. And that is really what we're there for and what we do best. I'll just end by talking about what's going on at the moment with phone hacking and the terrible things that have happened within the national press. Leamington Inquiry is, as you know, looking into the scandals and is taking evidence currently from all sorts of people, and quite rightly so. What happened has been, it's been known in the industry, frankly, but has been a terrible injustice to the people concerned, and is quite rightly now being aired widely. I think what will happen with this is that the newspaper industry generally will be much more tightly regulated as a result of this. I can't see any other way out of it. And currently we have the Press Complaints Commission, which is a body which is funded by the industry, who we're basically regulating ourselves. And that's worked quite well up until now, and it certainly works quite well for papers like Recorder, local newspapers, who basically don't want to upset anybody, they don't want to break the law, they just want to do what they need to do and do it in a lawful way. So every now and again, something goes wrong, they'll go through the PCC and they'll say, can you put this right, it's a mistake, blah blah blah, we'll do it. It works quite well. They've lost control of the national press, unfortunately, who frankly don't care what they say. There's so much competition in national newspapers, certainly in recent years. Success means you make money from advertising. You don't get all the advertising unless you've got a big readership. You don't get a big readership unless you've got exclusive stories. And frankly, they won't get any exclusive stories without doing the things which were now coming out. So it's phone hacking, it's it's rummaging through people's rubbish bins, it's all the other nefarious bits and pieces. And they're now getting all over the calls for it. The trouble is, it will be the whole industry that suffers for it. And I can see a time where local newspapers, and again freedom of the press certainly at a local level, will suffer hugely because there will be a much heavier hand upon us in terms of what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, simply because of how the national press have acted. But it will affect local newspapers, and there are a lot of local newspapers who will not do the things which I've just talked about locally because they will be afraid of coming under some swinging fine or other form of censure for doing something relatively mild. They won't be able to afford to pay the fine. They won't be able to afford any other censure that involves closing for a week or whatever else, because that will be the sort of penalty that could be imposed. So they won't do it. They won't be able to afford it, so they won't do it. So you'll end up with neutered local newspapers who will not feel able to do what they've done up until now. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but that looks to be the way it's going. And if it does, it'll be a shame. Frankly, as far as the national newspapers go, it'll serve them right. If it affects local newspapers, which I feel it might, then I think we all lose because of that. But we'll have to see. It's going to be a while before the evidence is heard and before the recommendations come out. So I may be too pessimistic. Hopefully I am. But until that time, we'll carry on doing what we've always done, and hopefully you'll tell us when we're going wrong. You'll tell us if we're not doing what you want because you're the readers. And if we're not pleasing you, we're not doing a job. So, we always want feedback. So feel free at any stage to contact me. Let me know. As Richard has today, we just had a discussion about various things, and we've sorted out a way forward on that. And hopefully better news for the future. So there's always that conversation to be had.
Good.
And that's it.
Time for just a couple of questions.
Well, it's not a question, Mark, it's just a comment, really. First of all, congratulations on the tremendous campaign you did on behalf of First Step a few while back, which raised a tremendous amount of money for our organisation. And I think that got in a lot of readership as well. People follow that week after week. If you were to try to do something similar with the toll booths at the Dartford Tunnel, I'd vote for it.
Well, I tell you what, I'm part of being editor of the Romford Recorder. I'm also editor for 3 camp papers now, and that's certainly one of their campaigns.
Mr. President, thank you for an interesting talk. I had one distinctive moment in my life relating to Romford Recorder. It was in the days that Roy Mills was the editor.
Who I took over from now.
Yeah. And I phoned him up one day and told him he got the date wrong on the paper.
It happens to us all.
There are times in the past when we've left the date off entirely. So.
We could take one more if we have it. Jim?
I have an interest, obviously, from your back. But do you really feel that the current inquiry is actually going to impinge upon local level? I've listened to some aspects of this, and a particular one I saw yesterday was a journalist who made the point that he worked for a Sunday newspaper where they had a lawyer on site overlooking the paid reporters.
Yeah.
The weakness was that the freelancers were not overseen. That meant that the problems didn't stem from the employees, it stemmed from lack of control. This is not a difficult thing to deal with.
No, it's not.
It may be costly in the sense that the Nationals would have to have a lawyer, but what do you do that is contentious?
Well, all national newspapers have lawyers. I mean, there's always...
They weren't used properly, otherwise we wouldn't be in the state we're in.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the lawyer can always be overridden, and often is, because...
If you had a lawyer, they would never have had the Millie Dowler situation.
No, they wouldn't necessarily know about it. And
you're underrated Murdoch, aren't you?
Yeah.
No, I said if you had a lawyer. If the lawyer's advice is gone against, nothing you can do about it.
The lawyer has to ask the question in the first place. If he doesn't ask the question, he doesn't get told. And
exactly right.
Maybe he doesn't want to know the answer, so he doesn't ask the question.
Yeah.
But all national newspapers have lawyers on site all the time who do what lawyers do. But they can be overridden. Sadly, this inquiry, the testimony to the inquiry, said that the particular lawyer that they had he left and wasn't replaced.
Yeah.
So that started a free-for-all. This guy was, in his testimony to the Leveson inquiry, was saying, in his opinion, this was a way of resolving the situation, relatively simply, if everything was reviewed by lawyers before publication. Now, you could say that would neuter the press, but surely it would be what we're trying to get to.
What it wouldn't do, you could have had 10 lawyers for every reporter. It wouldn't have stopped phone hacking.
You might have stopped you printing the extremes.
Possibly, but it wouldn't have stopped that private detective hacking into people's.
Possibly not, but it's the actual point of publication that I'm referring to. I think George is standing up. It's becoming a discussion.
I think your debate could go on for some time, and I think we ought to call a halt now. I'm going to pass over to Shiraz, who's going to give our vote.
Can you tell how many people read it?
Thank you, Mark, for coming out and giving your valuable time. You have such an interesting talk, and we appreciate your illustrious career and your positive contribution to the media. And thank you very much, and with our usual appreciation.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
It's always a sign of a good talk that it gets our members going with the questions and the debate. So thank you, Mark. If I could remind you, if there's any other business from anybody, if I could remind you of the apologies book, the menu, and the website. We too have a magazine which with flip page technology,
And a website, which I'm
and I would ask you to please be upstanding